The fly kept throwing itself against the glass. Tap. Pause. Tap. Outside the Kansas highway stretched flat and empty, a gray ribbon under a sun already starting to tilt toward evening. A few semis roared past, engines fading quickly into the distance. The elms along the lot had begun to turn gold, their leaves trembling with every gust of wind. A dark SUV idled by the utility pole at the far end of the parking lot, exhaust puffing in a steady rhythm, too steady for a car that should have been parked and off. Inside, the diner felt preserved in amber, faded wood paneling, ketchup bottles lined neatly in ranks, and a pie case that hummed faintly under buzzing fluorescent light. The HVAC groaned overhead, fighting to hold on to warmth. The air smelled of coffee and bacon grease, layered so deep it had become part of the walls. Ethan Walker set his duffel bag on the cracked leather bench. The leather sagged with age, but he sat upright anyway, back straight, shoulders squared. It wasn't conscious. 18 years in the Marine Corps had carved posture into him like stone. Even now, in plain clothes, he still looked like a man waiting for inspection. Margaret Chen, the owner, came from behind the counter. Early 40s, dark hair pulled back with a pencil, apron washed too many times. She carried herself like someone who'd raised kids, paid mortgages, and learned how to read strangers with one glance. "Coffee?" she asked. "Black," Ethan said. His voice was low, almost careful. "You want food with that?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Ham sandwich. White bread." She gave him a small nod, no fuss, and disappeared back into the kitchen. Ethan didn't really want food. He wanted somewhere still. Somewhere that didn't echo with memories of bases and barracks and the hollow sound of empty houses. Kansas had been home once, before the winter morning when his parents' car hit ice on Highway 54. 17 years old, suitcase by the door, he'd lasted a week before leaving town. Some wounds didn't close. They just got quieter until someone touched them again. At the window, an older black couple shared soup and a newspaper. The woman mouthed words silently as she read, the man dipped his bread with practiced patience. At the next table, a little boy about 4 ran endless loops around the chairs with a plastic car in his fist. Every time he made the vroom sound, the older woman shook her head, smiling in a way that said she'd once raised noisy children herself. Ethan watched them all. Not out of suspicion, just habit. His eyes swept corners, exits, small movements. He read a room the way other men read a map. And that's when he noticed her. A girl. 3, maybe 4 years old. Dark curls half loosed from a ponytail. Brown skin. A pale blue dress too formal for a rest stop. She sat tucked into the corner booth, half hidden behind a brittle cactus in a chipped clay pot. She wasn't eating. She wasn't fidgeting. She sat perfectly still, hands folded tight on her lap, eyes scanning the room in glances too quick to land anywhere for long. Across from her sat a man in a gray suit. Blonde hair neatly trimmed, part sharp as a razor. He read a thick hardcover book without a title. He didn't talk. He didn't look at her. He didn't touch her plate, didn't lean in with a word of comfort, didn't even give her the distracted nod of a real parent. He turned pages like the child wasn't even there. Nobody takes a 3-year-old to a roadside diner and ignores them completely. Nobody drives across an interstate and treats a child like carry-on luggage. Ethan didn't look directly at them again. He traced the rim of his mug with one finger, watching the warped reflection in the napkin dispenser instead. Children make patterns. Fear makes them too. All he had to do was wait. Margaret came back, setting down his coffee. "Need sugar, hon?" she asked. "I'm good." He met her eyes for a fraction of a second. They narrowed almost imperceptibly. She felt it too, something wrong humming under the quiet. The little boy's car clattered across the floor, bumping into the girl's chair. She flinched so slightly it was barely motion. The man in the suit glanced up just once, sharp, cold, and Leo froze in his tracks. The girl folded tighter into herself. The fly tapped the glass again. Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew that look. He'd seen it in villages overseas, in interrogation rooms, in places where fear didn't need to shout to be obeyed. He let his eyes slide back to his mug, breathing slow, steady. Then the girl's gaze caught his. Just for a heartbeat, then away. Then back again, a little longer. Wide eyes, trembling just enough to be seen. Her lips pressed thin, her shoulders braced. Her right hand shifted on her lap. Fist. Open. Fist. Open. Fist. 3 times. Not a fidget. Not a game. A code. Ethan's throat tightened. The training manuals came back unbidden. When a victim cannot speak, they will signal. 3 times. Universal. He didn't dismiss it. He believed her. Margaret passed by with a tray of pie slices, and Ethan stood just enough to move aside, angling himself toward the corner booth. He leaned slightly, careful. "Cute kid," he said casually to the man. The man looked up, smile automatic, eyes flat. "She's my daughter." Too quick. Too rehearsed. "Pretty quiet for her age," Ethan said lightly. "She's shy. Doesn't like strangers." The man's hand tapped the book's spine once, sharp. The girl looked at Ethan again. Her eyes widened. Her hand shifted, small and slow. Fist. Open. Fist. Open. Fist. Deliberate. A signal cast like a lifeline. Ethan felt his nails dig into his palm. No doubt now. She was calling for help. He forced his face blank, carried his mug back to his seat. He didn't touch his sandwich. He placed both hands flat on the formica table. Then, just loud enough for Margaret to hear. "Call the sheriff. Now." She froze, eyes locking on his. For a second she searched his face for hesitation. She found none. She gave the smallest nod, then slipped through the swinging door to the kitchen. Ethan leaned back, steady but coiled. He could feel it, the air in the diner had shifted. The quiet had become a kind of pressure. The fly tapped the glass once more. And Ethan Walker knew the battle line had just been drawn. The hum of the HVAC unit sputtered and coughed, trying and failing to mask the tension that had thickened the air. Ethan sat as if he had nowhere else to be, his eyes fixed on the window but his ears catching every scrape of a fork, every squeak of leather from the corner booth. The little girl hadn't moved. She sat rigid, shoulders drawn tight, small fingers digging into the hem of her pale blue dress. Her curls had slipped further down the side of her face, shading one eye. She looked at him again. This time there was no mistaking it. Fist. Open. Fist. Open. Fist. Each motion slower, deliberate, like a soldier marking time on a silent watch. It wasn't the distracted fidget of a bored child. It was a code. A cry smuggled out of a body too young to use words. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered the manual, the training slides flashed across an old projector in Quantico. When a victim cannot speak, they will signal. 3 times. Universal. Do not dismiss it. He didn't dismiss it. Cole, the man in the gray suit, glanced up from his phone, his pale eyes cutting across the table like the sweep of a searchlight. The look landed not on Ethan, not on the room, but on the girl. Just one glance, sharp as a blade pressed flat. The girl dropped her hand to her lap so quickly it might have been burned. She didn't blink. She just froze. Ethan pressed his thumb into the edge of his coffee mug, grounding himself. He knew that look. He'd seen it in villages overseas where a commander's presence was enough to silence a room full of people. Control didn't need volume. It just needed to be believed. Margaret emerged from the kitchen, tray of apple pie slices balanced in her hands. Her face was composed, but Ethan caught the quick dart of her eyes toward the corner booth before she set down the plates at another table. She'd seen it too. She knew something was wrong. Ethan rose slowly, careful not to look rushed. He carried his mug toward the counter, brushing past the booth as if by accident. He let his shadow spill across the girl's table for just a second longer than necessary. "Cute kid," he said casually, directing the words at Cole. Cole's head lifted. The smile on his lips was automatic, but his eyes stayed dead cold. "She's my daughter." The words came too quick, too ready. Ethan had interrogated enough men to know when a story had already been rehearsed. "Pretty quiet for her age," Ethan said, tilting his mug as if the coffee inside were his only concern. "She's shy," Cole replied. "Doesn't like strangers." His voice didn't waver, but his hand shifted slightly, tapping the edge of his book with a flat impatience. The girl, Lily, Ethan thought the name fit her, looked at him again. For the third time. Her lips pressed together so tightly they went pale. Her eyes, wide and round, begged him to understand what she couldn't risk saying. And then she did it again. Fist. Open. Fist. Open. Fist. Slower this time. The signal stretched like a rope between them. Ethan swallowed hard. No more doubt. No more hesitation. That was SOS. A silent scream in the shape of a small hand. He slipped a peppermint candy from his pocket, rolling it across his palm like it was nothing. He leaned just enough to place it on the edge of their table. "My niece loved these," he said softly, almost apologetically. "Kids usually go for strawberry." Lily's eyes flicked to the candy. Her fingers twitched, hovering just above the wrapper. For a moment, Ethan thought she might take it. That she might show him again, in the smallest way, that she was reaching back. But before she could, Cole's hand shot out. The motion was sharp, precise. He struck her wrist, not loud enough to draw attention, not hard enough to bruise visibly, but with a force that made her recoil as though from fire. "She's allergic," Cole said coldly. His smile returned, brittle and polished. "Don't give her anything without asking." Lily's hands curled into fists in her lap. Her shoulders trembled. She didn't cry. She didn't dare. But her eyes shone with betrayal, the candy still glittering between them like a piece of evidence on a battlefield. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice neutral. He picked up the peppermint, slipped it back into his pocket, and walked to his seat. The diner had gone so quiet it seemed to creak. The old couple by the window stopped eating for just a moment, pretending to focus on their soup. Leo's toy car rolled across the floor and bumped gently into Ethan's boot. He picked it up, handed it back, and forced a thin smile for the boy's sake. Margaret watched him from the counter, towel still in her hands. Her jaw was tight. Ethan sat down. He didn't touch his sandwich. He let his hands rest flat on the formica. He breathed once, deep. Then, loud enough for Margaret alone, he said. "Call the sheriff. Now." She froze. For a heartbeat, her eyes searched his face for any sign of uncertainty. She found none. Her nod was small but final. She slipped back into the kitchen, the swinging door whispering closed behind her. Ethan leaned back, every muscle coiled but contained. He'd seen the signal twice now. He'd seen the reaction, the control, the flinch. There was no mistaking it. The fly tapped against the window again. And Ethan Walker knew this quiet Kansas diner had just become a battlefield. The diner had fallen into a silence so heavy that even the hum of the fridge sounded too loud. Every scrape of fork against plate, every shuffle of shoes on tile, carried across the room like an echo. The little girl, Lily, Ethan was already naming her in his mind, sat rigid in the corner. Hands locked in her lap. eyes flicking between him and the man in the suit. She hadn't moved since the last signal. Not a wiggle, not a stretch. She was frozen, waiting to see if someone would answer. Cole turned a page of his book with deliberate calm, but Ethan saw it, the way his jaw tightened, the way he scanned the room without moving his head. He knew eyes were on him. Predators always knew. At the window, the older couple had gone quiet too. The man folded his newspaper but didn't read. The woman dipped bread into her soup, though the bowl had been empty for a while. She was watching out of the corner of her glasses. She'd noticed. Maybe she didn't understand, but she felt the tension radiating from that corner booth like heat. Margaret reappeared, towel still in her hand. Her face was calm, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the glass she pretended to polish. She caught Ethan's eye for the briefest second and gave the smallest nod. Phone call made. Help was on the way. Leo drove his toy car along the counter now, humming under his breath. He nearly veered too close to the booth again, but his grandmother touched his arm gently, guiding him back. Even a child could sense it, something in the air was wrong. Ethan stood, carried his mug back to the counter. He lowered his voice just enough for Margaret to hear. How long? Rachel said units are close, Margaret whispered. But this road's quiet. Could be 10, 15 minutes. Too long. Ethan's eyes slid toward the booth again. Lily was staring at him now, her eyes unblinking. She didn't blink, didn't breathe, until Cole shifted in his seat. At that movement, she dropped her gaze to the table, small shoulders curling inward. People here trust you, Ethan said to Margaret quietly. If this turns bad before they arrive, they'll need to back me up. Nothing loud. Just don't let him walk her out. Margaret swallowed, nodded. I'll keep them steady. Ethan returned to his seat. He let his shoulders relax, like a man content with his coffee, but his senses stayed sharp. He counted exits. He measured the distance between Cole and the door. He marked every second of Lily's silence. When the door to the kitchen swung open again, the older woman at the window finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost a murmur meant only for her husband. That little girl hasn't eaten a thing, she said. Not one bite. Ethan heard it. So did Cole. The man's eyes flicked toward her, then back to his book. His jaw pulsed once, twice. The old man lowered his paper. I know, he said simply. It was a small exchange, but it mattered. Ethan felt it, the shift. He wasn't the only one who saw anymore. Margaret saw. The couple saw. They might not be ready to act, but they would remember. They would speak if asked. And that was enough to steady him. Cole turned another page, the motion too crisp to be casual. Lily's eyes darted once more toward Ethan. Her small lips pressed together, trembling. The fly tapped the glass again. Somewhere outside, faint but growing, came the wail of a siren. Cole's head lifted. For the first time since Ethan had seen him, the smile slipped. The siren was faint, still far off, but it cut through the quiet of the diner like a blade. Cole's head snapped up from his book. His pale eyes flicked to the window, then back to the little girl, then to the door. The mask of calm he'd worn since walking in cracked just enough for Ethan to see the steel underneath. He closed the book slowly, carefully, as though even that motion were a calculated choice. Then he rose to his feet. Come on, Lily, he said. His voice was flat, stripped of the earlier politeness. He reached across the table and clamped his hand around her wrist. She didn't scream. She didn't even try. But her whole body stiffened, and her wide eyes flew to Ethan like a flare launched into the night sky. Ethan stood. He didn't slam his chair back or throw his weight forward. He just stood, steady, and stepped into the narrow aisle that led from the booth to the front door. 10 feet separated them, but it might as well have been a battlefield line. Cole tugged the girl gently at first, coaxing, almost persuasive. "We're leaving now." She hesitated, feet dragging against the tile. Her small fingers clenched at her dress hem, the other hand trembling at her side. She wasn't resisting outright, but her body said what her voice couldn't: she didn't want to go. Ethan's voice was low, steady, the same tone he'd once used to cut through chaos on foreign soil. "Where do you think you're taking her?" Cole stopped, eyes narrowing. "Home," he said. "Where do you think?" "That's not what she wants." Ethan shifted his weight just enough to block the path. "Police are on their way. If you leave now, you'll answer for it later. Stay, and maybe they'll listen to your story." Cole's smile returned, brittle and thin. "Who the hell do you think you are? Some drifter in a diner? This is my daughter. You've got no right." Ethan didn't move. She signaled for help. Twice. For the first time, the words seemed to land. Cole's eyes flashed with something sharp, and his grip on the girl tightened. She let out a small whimper, barely audible, but her feet scuffed against the floor as she braced against his pull. Margaret's voice came from behind the counter, quiet but firm. "Sir, maybe you should wait. Let the sheriff sort this out." Cole's head snapped toward her, expression hard. "Stay out of it." But the old couple at the window had turned fully now, their eyes fixed on him. The man's hands were folded tight over his paper, knuckles white. The woman's glasses had slipped low on her nose, but she didn't blink. They weren't speaking, not yet, but their silence had weight. "Witnesses." Cole tugged again, rougher. Lily stumbled forward, her shoes squeaking on the tile. Her face twisted, caught between obedience and terror. Ethan stepped closer. Just one step, but it closed the distance enough to make the threat clear. "That's enough." Cole's jaw clenched. His free hand rose just slightly, as though he might shove Ethan aside. He stopped short, reading the steadiness in Ethan's stance. The Marine wasn't bluffing. He'd plant himself there until the walls came down. The siren outside grew louder. Red and blue lights flickered faintly against the glass, painting the booths in shifting shadows. Cole's eyes darted to the window, then back to Ethan. For the first time, his control cracked, his breath came faster, harsher. "You're going to regret this," he hissed, voice so low only Ethan heard. Ethan didn't reply. He just held his ground, gaze locked on the little girl. "You don't have to go with him," he said, softer now, words aimed only at her. "You're safe." Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. But her body told the truth, her feet dug into the tile, her arm pulled back against Cole's grip. The door swung open. Cold night air rushed in, followed by boots on tile. Sheriff Rachel Monroe stepped in first, calm and commanding, badge gleaming under the diner's yellow light. Behind her came Officer Tommy Briggs, hand resting on his holster but not drawn. "Stop right there," Rachel said firmly. Her voice filled the diner, steady and absolute. Cole froze. For the first time, he looked small, not in size, but in presence. His hand tightened one last time on Lily's wrist, then slackened. She stepped back, just a half step, but enough. Ethan exhaled slowly, steadying his pulse. The standoff had broken, not with a shout, not with violence, but with the sound of sirens and the courage of a child who refused to move forward. Rachel Monroe didn't raise her voice, but every ear in the diner bent toward her. Authority clung to her tone the way dust clings to Kansas wind. "Step away from the child," she said. Cole's lips curled in a sneer that didn't match his words. "This is a mistake. She's my daughter. We were just leaving." "Then you won't mind proving it," Rachel replied. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, never left him. Kansas statute requires ID and proof of guardianship when there's suspicion of custodial interference. "We'll start there." Cole's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked to the door, calculating. Outside, the SUV still idled, exhaust curling into the dark. But with 2 uniforms blocking the exit and Ethan planted between, the path was closed. "Sir," Officer Tommy Briggs said, his voice cautious but firm, "let's keep this easy." "Release her hand." Cole's grip lingered just a fraction too long, as though letting go might cost him everything. Then, with a theatrical sigh, he dropped Lily's wrist. She stumbled back, shoulders hunching. For a heartbeat she stood alone in the space between men, trembling, unsure. Then her eyes lifted, searching. They found Ethan. Without a word, she darted forward and pressed herself against his leg, clutching the fabric of his jeans with tiny fists. She didn't cry, didn't make a sound. But the way she buried her face in his side was louder than any scream. Ethan's hand hovered for a moment before settling gently on her shoulder. He didn't pull her close, didn't make a show of it. He simply stood there, a steady wall she could hide against. The diner exhaled as if everyone had been holding breath. The old woman by the window let her spoon clink into the empty bowl. Margaret's hand dropped the towel she hadn't stopped wringing. Even Leo went still, toy car dangling forgotten in his hand. Rachel moved closer, careful, every step measured so as not to spook the girl. "Sweetheart," she said softly, crouching to Lily's height, "can you tell me your name?" Lily didn't answer. Her grip on Ethan's leg tightened. Cole scoffed. "She's shy. I told you already. She doesn't like strangers." Rachel ignored him. She glanced at Ethan instead. His steady gaze told her what she needed. "This isn't shyness, it's fear." "Sir, your ID," Tommy pressed, stepping closer to Cole. Cole pulled a wallet from his suit pocket with exaggerated slowness. He slid out a driver's license, holding it between 2 fingers. "See? Iowa. Everything's in order." Rachel took it but didn't look down. "And documentation proving guardianship?" Cole's smile thinned. "I don't carry her birth certificate in my pocket." "That's fine," Rachel said smoothly. "You'll come with us to the station. We'll confirm there." "I told you. You'll come," she cut in. Her voice didn't rise, but the authority in it could have anchored a storm. Ethan felt Lily shift against him, her head turning just enough to peek at the officers. Her eyes were wet, wide, pleading for something she didn't dare speak. Rachel noticed too. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small notepad. She flipped to a clean page and laid it flat on the counter near Ethan, sliding a crayon across. "If you don't feel like talking, sweetheart, maybe you can draw." Lily hesitated. Her fingers uncurled slowly from Ethan's jeans. She stepped half an inch forward, took the crayon, and bent over the paper. Small shaky lines formed, a stick figure of a little girl with a red X across her mouth, standing beside a taller figure in gray scribbles. Next to them she drew a boxy car with blackened windows. The diner went silent again. Rachel's eyes flicked up to Cole, then back down. She closed the notepad gently. "That'll do for now." Tommy shifted his stance. His hand rested near his holster, not threatening but ready. "Sir, you'll come with us. Now." Cole's composure cracked for the briefest second. His eyes burned as they cut toward Ethan, then Lily. His lips moved without sound, forming words meant only for them, "This isn't over." Ethan didn't flinch. He met the gaze head-on, steel in his eyes, and rested his hand protectively on Lily's small shoulder. Rachel gave a short nod. Tommy stepped forward, cuffs clicking open. The sound snapped the moment in two. Cole stiffened, but he didn't fight. He let the steel close around his wrists, expression slipping back to that eerie calm. As they led him toward the door, Lily pressed herself harder against Ethan's side. Her breath trembled against the fabric of his shirt. Outside, the cruiser light strobed red and blue across the glass, painting the diner in shifting colors. For the first time all night, Ethan let himself breathe fully. The girl had found her refuge. And the storm, though far from over, had broken just enough for her to step out of the shadows. The red and blue glow still pulsed faintly against the diner's windows when Ethan stepped outside. The Kansas night had gone cold, the kind of chill that crept under coats and stiffened the joints. He pulled Lily's jacket tighter around her shoulders as they crossed the lot. She clutched his hand with surprising strength for someone so small. Rachel's cruiser door stood open. "She rides with me," the sheriff said gently. Ethan nodded, crouched to meet Lily's eyes. "I'll be right behind you," he told her. "You're not alone." For the first time, she gave the smallest nod, one sharp dip of her chin, as if sealing a pact. Then she climbed carefully into the back seat, eyes never leaving him until the door shut. The Wichita County Sheriff's Office looked tired under fluorescent lights. Beige paint peeled near the corners, the coffee machine hissed its last dregs, and the waiting room chairs squeaked under anyone heavier than a child. But inside, it was warm, steady, and safe. Ethan sat near the door, duffel bag at his feet, hands resting on his knees. Across the hall, through a pane of frosted glass, he could see Cole in the interrogation room. Hands cuffed to the table, suit still immaculate. He leaned back in his chair like a man waiting for a flight, eyes half-lidded. Rachel sat opposite, calm but sharp, every question delivered with surgical precision. "State your full name." "Cole Everett Morgan." "Relation to the child?" "She's my daughter." "Biological?" "Yes." Rachel's brow barely twitched. "We'll need documentation." "It's at home. In Iowa." "You'll forgive me if I don't take your word for it." Cole smirked. "You'll forgive me if I say this is harassment." Behind the glass, Ethan's fists tightened. The man was slippery, practiced. He'd danced through questions before. He knew how to hold a line under pressure. In the adjoining room, Lily sat on a padded chair far too big for her. A female deputy had given her a paper cup of warm milk. She sipped in silence, eyes fixed on the floor. Her free hand twisted the hem of her dress until the threads frayed. Ethan stepped in quietly, crouching so he didn't tower over her. "Hey," he said softly. "Mind if I sit?" She glanced up, then back down. But she didn't shake her head. He pulled a chair close, angled sideways, giving her space. "You did brave back there. Real brave. Not many people can send a signal like that." Her lips trembled. The cup wobbled in her hand, milk rippling dangerously close to the rim. He reached out, not touching her, just steadying the cup with a finger against the cardboard. "Easy. You're safe here." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then she whispered, voice so faint he had to lean in. "He's not my dad." Ethan's chest tightened. "Who is he?" She shook her head violently, curls bouncing. "Don't know. He says I'm his. But I'm not." Her eyes brimmed, but no tears fell. She'd learned not to cry, Ethan realized. Crying never helped her before. "Do you know your mom's name?" he asked. Her voice faltered. "Grace." The name landed heavy in the air. Rachel, listening from the doorway, scribbled it down without looking away. "Do you know where she is?" Ethan pressed gently. Lily's small shoulders rose and fell. "She was crying, then gone. He took me." Her tiny fingers gripped the paper cup until it crumpled. Milk spilled onto her lap, and she flinched as though expecting punishment. Ethan pulled a napkin from the desk, dabbing quickly. Hey. Accidents happen. Nothing to worry about." She blinked at him, wide-eyed, uncertain. Then, slowly, she relaxed back into the chair. Across the hall, Cole leaned forward, resting cuffed wrists on the table. His smirk was gone now, replaced with a flat coldness. "You've got nothing," he told Rachel. "No crime. No proof." Just a scared kid who doesn't like strangers. Kids make things up all the time. Rachel didn't flinch. She slid a folder across the table, opening it with deliberate calm. Inside was a printout, an old arrest warrant from Iowa, never executed. Charges: custodial interference, child endangerment, suspected trafficking ties. Cole's smirk faltered. "We ran your name the second Margaret called it in," Rachel said. "You've been on lists before. Quiet lists, but lists all the same." He leaned back again, mask reassembling. "Those charges were dropped." "Dropped doesn't mean forgotten," Rachel said evenly. "And this time, we've got more than suspicion. We've got a witness." Her eyes flicked toward the one-way glass. Cole followed her gaze, meeting Ethan's stare through the blurred panel. For the first time, something shifted in those pale eyes, not fear, but calculation. A recognition. Ethan held the gaze, unblinking. He'd stared down worse. Back in the quiet room, Lily had drawn on the deputy's notepad. Crayon lines, uneven and jagged, a small figure with brown hair, a taller figure in gray with a square car behind them. She pressed so hard the wax broke. When Ethan leaned closer, she whispered, "He said if I tell, the monster will come." Ethan's hand stilled on the desk. He'd heard soldiers use the same words overseas: monsters, shadows, things that stalked when no one else listened. Fear weaponized. Fear planted so deep it silenced even children. "You told anyway," he said softly. "That makes you stronger than the monster." Her eyes flicked up, meeting his. For the first time, they didn't dart away. By the time midnight rolled past, the sheriff's office buzzed with quiet urgency. Deputies tapped keyboards, phones rang in clipped bursts, and printers spit out forms with case numbers already flagged for federal interest. Rachel stepped out of the interrogation room, file in hand. "He's stonewalling," she told Ethan. "But the feds are interested. Looks like he's part of something bigger, interstate transport. We may have just pulled a thread." Ethan glanced through the glass at Lily, curled under a blanket on the couch, clutching a stuffed animal someone had found in Lost and Found. Her eyelids drooped, but every few seconds she jolted awake, scanning the room to make sure he was still there. "What happens to her now?" he asked. Rachel sighed. "We'll get Child Protective Services here. But it's messy. If the mother's alive, she has rights. If she's missing," she trailed off. Ethan nodded slowly. His hands curled on his knees. He'd come in for coffee, maybe a sandwich, and now sat staring at the center of a storm that was only beginning. The monster wasn't just one man. It was a network, shadows crossing state lines, slipping past papers and names. And Ethan Walker, who thought his war was over, realized Kansas had handed him a new battle. The sheriff's office had thinned out by dawn. Paper cups littered the desks, the coffee machine hissed dry, and deputies rubbed their eyes while staring at glowing monitors. The buzz of printers and phones had ebbed into a tired hum, the rhythm of a long night settling into morning. Ethan hadn't moved much from the waiting area. His duffel bag sat untouched at his feet. Across the room, Lily slept curled under a blanket, her small body folded into the couch cushions like she was trying to vanish. Her grip around the borrowed teddy bear was so tight Ethan thought the seams might split. Every time her body twitched, he leaned forward, ready to steady her, but she never cried out. She just clung tighter. Rachel approached with a stack of folders under her arm. Her dark hair was tied back, circles under her eyes, but her voice was steady. "We ran Morgan's background through federal databases. The name Cole Everett Morgan pops up in 3 different states, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas. Each time connected to temporary guardianship claims that fell apart under scrutiny." Ethan straightened. "So this wasn't the first?" Rachel shook her head. "Not even close. We also got a call from DHS. They've had his SUV flagged in connection with 2 other cases, both girls under 6. Both gone missing off interstate rest stops. The words sank like a weight in Ethan's chest. He looked at Lily, small hand fisted into the blanket. She could have been one of those missing files. Just another line in a report. Rachel set the folder down on the table. If not for Margaret's call, and you recognizing the signal, she might already be across state lines. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. She shouldn't have had to send it at all. Rachel's gaze softened for a second. No, she shouldn't. Then her tone hardened again. Feds are sending a team. But they'll take time. Until then, I need to know what you saw. Every detail. How she signaled. How he reacted. Ethan replayed it carefully, the three fists opening and closing, the sharp glance at Cole when she hesitated, the way she recoiled when he reached across the table. His voice was clinical, precise, like a field report. But inside, each memory twisted like a blade. Rachel scribbled notes, then closed the file. You've got training. That makes your statement credible. But you're not law enforcement anymore, Ethan. Don't put yourself in the middle again. Understood? He didn't answer. Not right away. Finally, he nodded once. Understood. But his eyes drifted back to Lily, and Rachel saw the truth in them. He was already in the middle. Later that morning, sunlight spilled pale and cold through the frosted windows. Margaret arrived with a box of muffins and thermoses of hot coffee. She hugged Lily first, careful not to startle her. Got something sweet for you, honey, she whispered. Lily nodded faintly, though she didn't let go of the teddy bear. Margaret looked at Ethan, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. I've seen a lot in my diner. Truckers, drifters, runaways. But last night, she trailed off. Thank you. Ethan shook his head. She saved herself. I just noticed. Margaret's lips pressed tight, but she didn't argue. She set the muffins on the counter and busied herself pouring coffee for the deputies. By midday, Cole was moved to a holding cell, stripped of his suit jacket, still wearing that same expression of quiet contempt. When the deputies walked past, he stared at them with pale, unblinking eyes. A man unshaken, as though even behind bars he believed he'd find a way out. Ethan watched through the glass. The steel cuffs, the bars, the concrete walls, they didn't look like enough. You think he's scared? He asked quietly. Tommy Briggs, the younger officer, leaned against the wall, arms folded. He should be. But guys like that, they're wired different. They don't break easy. They just wait for cracks in the system. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen that type before, in war zones, in backroom deals where one wrong glance cost lives. Predators who wore normal skin but moved like wolves. In the afternoon, a woman arrived at the station. Mid-30s, hair disheveled, eyes wild. She clutched a handbag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Grace, Rachel said softly, guiding her inside. Lily stirred when she heard the name. Her eyes fluttered open, then locked on the woman. She froze. No cry of recognition, no leap into arms. Just a long, stunned stare. Grace dropped to her knees anyway. Baby, she whispered, tears spilling. My Lily. Lily hugged the teddy bear tighter and looked away. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. The rejection cut deeper than a scream. Grace crumpled, shoulders shaking. Rachel caught her before she fell, easing her into a chair. Ethan stood in the corner, arms folded, watching. He saw it, the gulf between mother and daughter carved by months, maybe years, of fear. It wouldn't bridge in a single day. Later, Rachel explained quietly. Grace was trapped with him. Controlled. She tried to escape once but got dragged back. He used Lily to keep her quiet. She's a survivor too. Ethan said nothing. He only looked through the glass again, at Cole pacing his cell, and thought of all the cracks men like him could exploit. That night, the station quieted again. Lily slept in the cot of the medical room, her small breaths rising and falling under a blanket. Grace sat nearby, head bowed, still crying softly. Ethan sat just outside the door, notebook open on his lap. He wasn't writing much, just a line here and there, details, impressions, the kind of things he'd once recorded after missions. But one line stood alone, written heavier than the rest. Not just one man. A chain. He shut the notebook, leaned back, and closed his eyes. He could still feel Lily's small hand gripping his jeans, still hear the whisper in her voice, "He's not my dad." For 18 years, Ethan had served his country overseas. Now, sitting in a tired Kansas sheriff's office, he realized his next battle wasn't in a desert or jungle. It was here, hidden in plain sight, where children sent silent signals and prayed someone might see. And he had seen. Which meant he couldn't walk away. Not now. By the second day, the Wichita Sheriff's Office no longer felt like a small-town station. Phones rang in clipped patterns, faxes spit out endless sheets stamped federal hold, and strangers in dark suits filtered in with briefcases and short tempers. The air smelled of burnt coffee and photocopier toner, the scent of bureaucracy gearing up for war. Rachel stood at the center of it all, a calm pivot in the storm. She snapped orders to deputies, fielded questions from federal agents, and still found time to check on Lily every hour. Ethan watched her work, impressed despite himself. She reminded him of officers he'd served under, steady hands in chaos. But the system itself? That was different. The system moved like molasses. 2 men from DHS carried boxes into the evidence room, muttering about paperwork. One leaned over to Rachel. "We'll need Morgan transported to federal holding. Could be days before transfer clears. Judge has to sign off, interstate compacts, you know the drill." Rachel's jaw clenched. Days he could use to stall. The man shrugged. "Not our problem. Our job's the chain of custody. Yours is keeping him in the box until then." Ethan listened from a distance. He'd heard that tone before, soldiers who treated lives like chess pieces. He hated it then. He hated it now. Cole sat in his cell like he owned the space. Shirt rumpled, hair mussed, but posture perfectly upright. He asked for water, asked for a phone call, asked for his lawyer. Each request came smooth, polite, rehearsed. He never raised his voice, never lost composure. When a deputy walked by, Cole leaned casually against the bars. "You're wasting taxpayer money. That girl belongs to me. Wait until her mother shows up, she'll confirm it." The deputy said nothing, but his grip tightened on the baton at his side. Ethan caught the exchange from the hall. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "She already did," he said flatly. Cole's eyes flicked to him. For just a heartbeat, the mask cracked, something sharp and poisonous flared. Then the smirk returned. "The hero," he drawled. "Enjoying the spotlight? Bet you'll get your name in the paper. Maybe even a medal." Ethan didn't bite. He held the gaze like a steel wall. "The difference between us is simple. I don't need her to believe me. She already knows who saved her." Cole's hands tightened around the bars, knuckles whitening, before he leaned back into shadow. "You've no idea what you've stepped into, Marine. You think you stopped something? You barely scratched the surface." Ethan's gut tightened. He recognized the cadence, not bravado, not bluffing. It was the sound of a man who knew his net was bigger than the room could hold. By late afternoon, Rachel gathered Ethan and Tommy in her office. Folders lay scattered across the desk, photos clipped together with sticky notes. Federal analysts cross-referenced Morgan's travel records, Rachel said. "He's been in 4 states the past 6 months. Every stop overlaps with missing child reports. Girls, ages 3 to 7. Always at rest stops, diners, small towns near interstates. Tommy whistled low. That's not coincidence. Rachel slid another photo across. A grainy surveillance still, the same gray SUV parked at a truck stop in Oklahoma. In the corner of the frame, a blurred shape, a child's hand pressed against the window. Ethan felt his stomach turn. Feds believe he's part of a supply chain, Rachel continued. Not the top, not the bottom. Middleman. Moves kids from safe zones to holding points. From there, they disappear. Disappear where? Ethan asked, voice like gravel. Rachel's eyes were grim. Over the border. Or worse, inside our own. The room went still. Ethan leaned back, jaw tight. He'd fought wars overseas, thinking the worst monsters were oceans away. But this was here, under neon lights and coffee shop chatter. That night, Ethan sat in the quiet room where Lily slept. Grace had dozed in the chair beside her, exhaustion dragging her down. Lily clutched the teddy bear, eyes half open, watching Ethan more than resting. He crouched near her cot. You did good, he whispered. You're safe now. Her voice was barely a breath. He said safe doesn't last. Ethan froze. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that safety was permanent here. But he couldn't lie. Not after everything he'd seen. Instead, he said, maybe not forever. But as long as I'm here, it will. Her small hand reached out, brushing against his wrist, then retreated quickly as though unsure she was allowed. But the gesture burned hotter than any metal he'd ever pinned to his chest. Later, Rachel found Ethan outside by the lot, staring up at the Kansas night sky. Stars were drowned by sodium lights, but he wasn't looking for constellations. His mind was somewhere else, dusty roads, lost convoys, the faces of kids he couldn't save overseas. You're staying involved, Rachel said quietly, not a question. Ethan didn't look at her. If I walk away, she goes into a system that moves too slow. You said it yourself. Rachel crossed her arms. This isn't your war anymore. It is now. His voice was steady, but beneath it lay steel. I know what it looks like when predators think no one's watching. I can't unsee it. She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. All right. But you don't run solo. You want in. You run with me. By my rules. We've got one shot at cracking this net, and I won't have you blowing it by playing lone hero. Ethan turned, finally meeting her gaze. Deal. Rachel nodded once, the decision sealed. Back inside, Cole paced his cell like a caged wolf. He wasn't broken. He wasn't done. But for the first time, Ethan believed the man wasn't untouchable either. The system had cracks. The shadows were deep. But threads were unraveling. And Ethan knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't the end of Lily's rescue. It was only the beginning of a larger fight. The following morning, the sheriff's office buzzed with a strange mix of exhaustion and urgency. Deputies cycled between half-drunk coffee mugs and ringing phones, while the federal agents hunched over laptops, piecing together timelines. The gray SUV was gone, hauled to impound and stripped for evidence, but Cole's silence in the cell was louder than any confession. Rachel slid a manila folder across the table toward Ethan. We traced a burner phone found in his glove compartment. Last pinged near an abandoned truck stop off Highway 77, south of Arc City. Feds think it's just a dead end. I don't. Ethan scanned the aerial photo clipped inside. A cracked parking lot, weeds splitting through asphalt, 2 derelict trailers at the edge. Looks like a ghost town. Ghost towns make good covers, Rachel said. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. We can't wait for Washington. By the time paperwork clears, whatever's there will be gone. Tommy Briggs shifted uneasily in the corner. You're talking about running an op without federal approval. Rachel's eyes cut to him, sharp but steady. I'm talking about checking a lead before kids vanish. You in or out? Tommy hesitated, then nodded. In. Her gaze turned to Ethan. She didn't need to ask. His answer was already written on his face. They left Wichita before dawn, Rachel behind the wheel of an unmarked cruiser, Ethan riding shotgun, Tommy in the back with a field kit rattling at his feet. The highway stretched long and empty, headlights carving tunnels through fog. Ethan watched the miles roll by, arms folded, mind replaying Cole's warning, you barely scratched the surface. He'd heard similar threats in war zones, always from men who had networks behind them. Cole wasn't lying. Rachel broke the silence. You've done recon before. Ethan nodded. Plenty. Then you know this isn't combat. No firefights, no heroics. We get in, see what's there, and get out alive. Ethan glanced at her. Alive's the plan. But you know as well as I do, plans don't always hold. She didn't argue. By mid-morning, they turned off onto a narrow county road lined with scrub oak and rusted barbed wire. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust, the way abandoned places always did. The truck stop came into view like a scar on the landscape. One gas pump leaned sideways, canopy roof sagging. The store windows were boarded up, paint peeled down to gray wood. Two trailers sat at the back, their doors shut, padlocks glinting faintly. Rachel parked behind a ridge of shrubs. They stepped out quietly, radios clipped to their belts. Tommy muttered, if I didn't know better, I'd say nobody's been here in years. Ethan crouched low, scanning. You'd know better if you looked closer. Tracks. He pointed to faint tire marks etched in the dirt lot, fresh, less than a week old. Somebody's been here. Rachel's jaw tightened. She signaled for Tommy to circle left. She and Ethan moved right, keeping low. The trailers loomed closer. On one, graffiti sprayed in angry loops. The other looked newer, paint intact, but too clean for this forgotten place. Ethan ran a hand along the metal. Still warm in the sun. He pressed his ear to the side. For a moment, nothing. Then, muffled movement. A shuffle. A cough. He pulled back sharply. There's someone inside. Rachel's eyes narrowed. She keyed her radio. Unit 1 to base. We've got possible human presence in locked container. Request immediate backup. Static crackled back, followed by the dispatcher's voice, ETA 20 minutes. Hold position. 20 minutes. Too long. Rachel looked at Ethan. We wait. Ethan's fists flexed. Every second felt like a lifetime. He pictured Lily, 3 days ago in the diner, sitting silent while Cole pretended she wasn't real. He could hear her whisper still, he's not my dad. Another faint sound filtered from inside, a whimper, high-pitched, quickly stifled. Ethan's blood chilled. Those aren't adults. Rachel's face hardened. Children. They exchanged a look. Waiting wasn't an option anymore. Tommy rejoined, eyes wide. Back of the trailers got a vent cracked open. I heard voices. Little ones. Rachel made a fast decision. Ethan, with me. Tommy, cover perimeter. No one gets in or out. Tommy swallowed hard and nodded. Ethan moved to the lock, examining it. A heavy padlock, but old. He reached into his duffel, still carrying his field tools, relics of a Marine who hadn't stopped being one. A slim pry bar slid easily into the shackle. He twisted hard. The metal groaned, then snapped. Rachel steadied her weapon, covering him. Ethan swung the door open. The smell hit first, stale air, sweat, faint ammonia. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through tiny vents. Shapes huddled on thin mats, children. 4 of them, no older than 7. Eyes wide, faces pale, too quiet for kids that age. Rachel holstered her weapon and crouched low. It's okay. We're here to help. One boy flinched back, shaking his head violently. Another girl clutched a threadbare doll like her life depended on it. Ethan crouched too, voice steady. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you. A small hand reached tentatively from the shadows, touching his sleeve. He stayed still, letting the child's trust come in its own time. Behind him, Rachel's radio crackled. Back up 5 minutes out. She exhaled, relief flickering across her face. But Ethan's gut tightened. Because just then, from the tree line beyond the lot, came the low growl of an engine. He turned sharply. A black pickup truck rolled into view, windows tinted, tires crunching slow over gravel. Rachel swore under her breath. We've got company. Ethan rose, positioning himself between the trailer and the approaching truck. His stance was steady, shoulders squared. The war wasn't overseas anymore. It was here, on cracked Kansas asphalt, in the shadow of a forgotten truck stop. And it was only beginning to break cover. The black pickup rolled into the lot like a predator circling prey. Its headlights were off, but the low growl of the engine reverberated through the cracked asphalt. Ethan stiffened, stepping forward until his frame blocked the trailer's open doorway. Rachel raised her weapon, keeping it angled low but ready. The truck slowed, then stopped 20 yards away. For a long moment, nothing happened. The children inside the trailer whimpered softly, clutching at one another. Rachel whispered without turning, "Stay with them. If this goes bad, you close the door." Ethan's eyes stayed locked on the truck. If this goes bad, they'll torch the whole thing before backup arrives. The driver's door opened with a creak. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, denim jacket, ball cap pulled low. Another figure slid out of the passenger side. Both moved with the heavy calm of men who weren't afraid. Rachel called out, "Sheriff's Department." Hands visible. The taller man chuckled, holding his hands half-raised. "Relax, Sheriff. We're just stopping for a smoke." Ethan's instincts screamed otherwise. The way they scanned the lot, the subtle shift of their stances, it was recon, not leisure. "Smokers don't drive with their lights off," Ethan said evenly. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd called bluffs before. The second man grinned, teeth flashing in the gloom. "Maybe we don't like being seen." Rachel's radio crackled faintly. "Units, 2 minutes out. Hold position." 2 minutes could stretch a lifetime. The taller man tilted his head toward the trailer. "Funny place for a stakeout. What you got in there? Scrap metal?" Ethan shifted his weight, a wall of muscle and resolve in front of the doorway. "Nothing you'll ever see." The second man's grin thinned. He reached into his jacket. Rachel snapped her gun up instantly. "Hand where I can see it." The man froze, then slowly pulled out a lighter. He flicked it open, the tiny flame dancing. But his smirk never wavered. "Relax, Sheriff. Just warming up." Ethan's jaw tightened. It wasn't about the lighter. It was the message. Fire, threat, destruction. They didn't need bullets to end this, they only needed gasoline. Inside the trailer, one of the kids began to sob. Ethan heard it and knew the men did too. Their expressions sharpened, like wolves scenting meat. "Step back from the trailer," the taller man said, voice flat now. "And we all walk away clean." Rachel's answer was steel. "Not happening." For a beat, silence reigned, broken only by the faint hiss of the lighter. The two men shifted subtly, angling out, trying to flank. Ethan caught it instantly. Combat math etched itself into his brain, 2 hostiles, one armed with fire, one likely carrying. Distance short, cover minimal. He spoke low, just for Rachel. When they move, you take right. She didn't argue. The taller man suddenly barked, now. The second man lunged sideways, hand diving for his belt. Rachel fired, a sharp crack splitting the air. The man dropped, howling, clutching his thigh as the lighter skittered across the pavement. The taller man charged straight at Ethan. Big mistake. Ethan met him head-on, momentum slamming like two rams colliding. The man swung wild, a fist like a hammer. Ethan blocked with his forearm, drove his elbow into the man's ribs, then twisted, sending him sprawling against the gravel. Stay down, Ethan growled. But the man scrambled, reaching for something glinting at his waistband. Ethan stomped down hard, pinning his wrist. The weapon, a knife, clattered free. Red and blue lights flared across the lot. Sirens wailed. Backup had arrived. Deputies poured in, weapons drawn. Hands up. Don't move. Rachel kicked the knife away, cuffing the downed man herself. Ethan stepped back, chest heaving but steady. The children inside the trailer whimpered louder at the noise. One little girl pressed her palms over her ears, rocking. Ethan turned immediately, shutting the door halfway to shield them from the chaos. It's over, he told them, voice soft but sure. You're safe. Minutes later, the two men were dragged into cruisers, their defiance cracking into curses. One shouted toward Cole's name, spitting threats that only confirmed what Rachel already suspected: this was bigger, wider, deeper. Rachel stood beside Ethan, breathing hard. Sweat clung to her brow, but her eyes gleamed with the adrenaline of survival. You held the line. Ethan shook his head. We all did. He glanced at the trailer. But this is just one stop. How many more out there? Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence carried its own weight. Tommy jogged up, pale but steady. Kids are stable. Medics on the way. He lowered his voice. Ethan, they wouldn't have made it without you. Ethan didn't reply. His gaze lingered on the highway stretching into the distance, empty and endless. Somewhere out there, more children were waiting, sending signals no one could see. And he knew, deep in his bones, the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The courthouse in Wichita hadn't seen this much commotion in years. Vans with satellite dishes jammed the street. Reporters crowded the steps, shouting over each other, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Headlines had already spread across the Midwest. Former Marine saves children from trafficking ring. Kansas case could expose national network. Ethan hated every word of it. He kept his head low as Rachel ushered him through the side entrance, past security guards with weary eyes. His old duffel bag felt heavier than combat gear. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Wooden benches filled with townsfolk, activists, even strangers who'd driven hours just to witness. At the front, Cole sat in a crisp suit, hair slicked back, hands cuffed but posture relaxed. The smirk was back, faint but defiant, as if the entire trial was nothing more than an inconvenience. His attorney, Scott Renner, oozed confidence, a silver-tongued veteran of high-profile defenses. He leaned close, whispering into Cole's ear, then rose smoothly as the judge entered. All rise. The proceedings began. The prosecution opened with clarity, photographs of the abandoned trailer, the children rescued, the padlock Ethan had broken. Rachel testified first, calm and factual. She described the call from Margaret's diner, the distress signals, the timeline of Cole's capture. Then Tommy took the stand, nervous but steady. He detailed the truck stop confrontation, how the men had threatened, how Ethan had shielded the children. His words painted Ethan as more than a bystander, he was the hinge the whole case turned on. Renner struck back like a viper. He waved documents claiming Cole had temporary guardianship of Lily. He called the rescued children runaways misidentified in hysteria. He described Ethan as a soldier addicted to battle, seeing enemies where none exist. "Mr. Walker," Renner said when Ethan was finally called, "aren't you trained to view the world as hostile? Isn't it possible you imagine distress where a normal person would see nothing?" Ethan's gaze was steady. "A normal person might have walked away. But I saw her signal. I've seen that look before, in villages overseas, in kids who couldn't speak the language but begged with their eyes. It wasn't my imagination. It was survival." The courtroom went still. Even the judge's gavel wasn't needed. Grace testified next. She looked fragile in her plain blouse, but her voice carried scars sharp as glass. She recounted years under Cole's control, the isolation, the threats, the day he shoved her while pregnant. Her words cracked but didn't break. Renner tried to twist her testimony. "You stayed with him, did you not? You even signed documents placing Lily in his care." Grace's hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. "I stayed because he told me if I left, he'd take Lily. And he almost did." From the benches, a murmur rippled. Some wiped tears. Others shook their heads in quiet rage. The most haunting moment came when prosecutors displayed a crayon drawing, Lily's. It showed a girl holding a red candy, a tall man dragging her by the arm, another figure blocking the doorway. "This," the prosecutor said softly, "is how a child told her truth." Renner objected. "A child's drawing is not admissible evidence." The judge allowed it, not as proof, but as context. And the image hung heavy in the room, undeniable in its honesty. Outside, cameras captured every recess. Activists chanted for stronger trafficking laws. A woman clutched a poster, "Believe the silent signals." Social media erupted. Clips of Ethan's testimony circulated with captions like #SilentSOS and #NotMyDad. Ethan ignored it all. He wasn't here for headlines. He was here because one little girl in a diner had opened and closed her hand 3 times. In closing arguments, the prosecution framed the case not as a single act, but as part of a larger pattern. "This isn't about one man and one child," the prosecutor said. "It's about a chain of silence, broken only because a soldier refused to look away." Renner countered with venom. "This is hysteria dressed as justice. My client is a victim of overreach. A diner full of strangers mistook discipline for abuse, silence for guilt, and now a man's life hangs in the balance." The words rang hollow. Too much evidence weighed against Cole, the SUV footage, the children in the trailer, the accomplices caught at the truck stop. Still, Renner's skill left unease in the air. When the judge recessed for the day, tension lingered like storm clouds. Ethan stepped outside into the crush of reporters. Microphones flashed. "Mr. Walker, are you a hero? Do you believe Cole acted alone? Would you testify again if called?" Ethan stopped at the top of the steps. His eyes were tired, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm not a hero. I just listened when a child asked for help. The real question is, how many times have we missed the signals before?" The crowd hushed. For once, no one shouted back. He walked down the steps, duffel over his shoulder, as the storm swirled louder around him. Inside, verdicts waited. Outside, shadows still stretched across highways and diners across America. The war wasn't finished. It had only changed battlegrounds. The final day of the trial dawned cold and bright. Frost coated the courthouse steps, crunching under the shoes of reporters who had camped outside since before sunrise. Headlines screamed for resolution. Verdict expected in Kansas trafficking case. Former Marine's testimony could seal fate. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Families of missing children filled the benches, their eyes heavy with both grief and fragile hope. Activists held hands in silent prayer. Even the bailiff seemed subdued as he called the room to order. Cole was led in, cuffs glinting in the fluorescent light. He no longer wore the smug smirk, instead, his eyes burned with a cold, brittle fury. His lawyer whispered furiously in his ear, but Cole barely blinked. The judge entered, robes brushing the floor, and everyone rose. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of finality. Cole Morgan, you stand convicted of child endangerment, unlawful restraint, and conspiracy to traffic minors across state lines. On all counts, the evidence is overwhelming. This court sentences you to 40 years in federal custody, without the possibility of parole for the first 20. A gasp swept the courtroom. Some wept quietly. Others nodded in grim satisfaction. Cole stared straight ahead, face pale. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the gavel struck before a word left his lips. The sound echoed like a door slamming shut. Outside, reporters shouted, cameras flashing. Rachel guided Grace and Lily through the crush, shielding them as best she could. Ethan trailed behind, his frame cutting through the storm of microphones. A young reporter shoved forward. Mr. Walker. How does it feel to know you stopped a trafficking ring? Ethan paused, then shook his head. I didn't stop it. We stopped one man. The fight isn't over. The honesty of it silenced the crowd for a moment before they erupted again, chasing quotes. But Ethan was already walking toward the street, away from the noise. That evening, a quiet gathering was held at Margaret's Diner, the place where everything began. No reporters, no cameras, just a handful of people bound by what they had endured. Margaret served pie and coffee with trembling hands. Never thought I'd see this place on the news, she said softly. But I'm glad if it meant one child got saved. Grace sat near the window, Lily curled in her lap. The little girl still spoke little, but her eyes were brighter than before. She traced circles on the glass with her finger, humming faintly. Rachel lifted her cup in a small toast. To noticing the signals. And to answering them. Ethan raised his as well. To second chances. Days passed. The media frenzy moved on to other stories, but for those touched by the case, the ripples lingered. Lily began therapy sessions at a child center in town. She drew pictures more often now, houses with open doors, gardens with flowers. In each drawing, two figures stood side by side, one tall, one small, both smiling. Grace started working with local advocacy groups, speaking quietly but powerfully about the signs of abuse too often ignored. She told her story not for pity, but to keep another child from slipping through the cracks. And Ethan? For the first time in years, he didn't pack his bag to leave right away. He stayed. One Saturday morning, he sat on a park bench as Lily toddled over, clutching something in her hand. She climbed up beside him, her legs too short to dangle. Look, she said softly, her voice steadier now. She held out a red candy, unwrapped this time. Ethan smiled faintly, taking it from her. You kept one. She nodded. So you don't forget. His chest tightened. I won't. She leaned against him, head resting on his arm. For a moment, the world fell quiet, no courtrooms, no headlines, no shadows, just the simple weight of trust. Later that week, Rachel approached him outside the sheriff's office. You've got two choices, she said plainly. Go back to drifting, or stay and help us build something better. We're setting up a permanent task force for child protection. We could use a man who sees what others miss. Ethan looked at her for a long time, then at Lily playing nearby with a ball. The laughter she let out when it rolled too far wasn't the sound of a victim, it was the sound of a child reclaiming her life. He exhaled slowly. All right. I'll stay. But not as a soldier. As a guardian. Rachel smiled faintly. That's exactly what we need. Weeks later, a small ceremony was held at the newly opened Red Flame Shelter, a home for children pulled out of dangerous situations. The walls were painted bright, covered with drawings taped by little hands. Ethan stood near the entrance, wearing no uniform, no medals. just a man keeping watch. Lily ran up, pigtails bouncing, and slipped her hand into his. "Promise," she whispered. "Promise," he said, squeezing gently. "I won't disappear." The sun broke through the Kansas clouds, warm and golden, spilling light across the shelter's red roof. For the first time in years, Ethan let himself believe in dawn, not the kind marked by bugles or gunfire, but the kind marked by a child's smile. The storm had passed. The fight would go on. But here, now, in this fragile morning, they had found something worth keeping. Home.